Alrighty. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's virtual event, the state of gated versus ungated content. I'm Jonathan Gandolf, the founder and CEO of The Juice, and today's host of the event. I'll be joined by three tremendous panelists later in the event. But before we jump into the content, just a few housekeeping items to take care of. First, insert any questions throughout the event. You can either do it in chat or in Q&A. We'll be monitoring those throughout the event. There's a chance we might address some of them kind of in the flow of the conversation. Otherwise, we do have time saved at the end of the event to address some specific Q&A. Yes, the $1 million question. Today's slides will be made available to you post-event, so you don't need to worry about that. And then lastly, just an overview of the agenda for today. We'll begin with a quick 5 to 10 minute review of the report that inspired today's event. We'll then invite our panelists who are joining us on stage for a conversation around this topic. And finally, we'll end it with Q&A from you, the audience. So we appreciate you joining today, and we're looking forward to the conversation. Before our panel discussion, I just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of both the Juice and the report itself to kind of guide the conversation later. So the Juice is a content curation and distribution platform. I always say the most important word of that description is the and. For B2B professionals, we curate content for them. So you can sign up for the platform and based on your job function, your job level, your industry, what you're interested in, topics you care about, our platform is going to curate the right content for you. For B2B brands, what that means is we distribute your content to the right audience at the right time, and we can even help inform what the right content is. So across our platform, we have over 300,000 resources. Everything inside of our platform is ungated, even if it started gated on the brand's website. So what that allows us to do is to do research across all 300,000 resources and compare gated versus ungated content. That's exactly what we did with our most recent trends report, which we partnered with Tourial, who you'll hear from later today. They were a great partner for this trends report. You can scan the QR code, or if you visit the Docs tab on the right, you'll actually see the report and be able to go to the report specifically. Again, we pulled from over 300,000 resources that included over 20,000 gated pieces of content. Lots of good research there. It's 21 pages. There's a lot to go through. If you actually hit the link or scan the QR code at the bottom of the page you land on, you'll get a sneak peek of one of our newest features. In addition to providing our users with the full content, you actually get a 3-minute summary. We call it a coffee break read, or you can also shorten it down to a 1-minute summary, which we call the Juice It version. I don't know about you, but through high school and college, I was a big Cliff's Notes fan. So today's presentation, we're going to give you the Cliff's Notes of the report. Still encourage you to check out the full report. There's some other good nuggets in there, but I wanted to pull out some of the key takeaways from the report that will inform today's conversation. First, through our CRM integration with our brands, we're able to see that 162 days is the average length between a content touch point and an opportunity or deal going closed won. For me, what this tells me is we so often when we gate content, we're thinking about that instant transaction. And the reality is content doesn't convert like that. Content actually converts over a much longer time frame, and it's 162 days on average is what we see. Instead of creating content for that one single point in time in that conversion, we should actually be thinking about the content that's going to drive a conversion 6 months down the road. In addition, when we're gating content, we're often thinking just about that one individual piece of content. And we all believe, myself, a former B2B marketer, that this is the piece. This is the one that's surely going to drive the conversion and it's going to create a new customer. Across that 162 days, the average individual is actually engaging with over 2 pieces of content, 2.2 to be exact. So again, think about how your content, whether you're gating it or ungating it, is fitting in a broader content spectrum that your audience is going to experience over the course of that 162 days. One of the things I really enjoyed about this report is that we didn't come out and say gating content is evil. There's actually a lot of nuance to this conversation. We'll have some of that conversation today. And I've been really encouraged by the broader community's kind of appreciation of there are the right times to gate content. And for us, we actually looked at those 20,000 gated resources, and we saw that by far, by a factor of 3x, the most engaging gated content was templates and toolkits. I think this is just goes to show that if you are gating content, make sure it's actionable, make sure it's useful. That's what people are going to be willing to fill out a form to engage with. All right. I also didn't love math in high school or college, so stay with me. There's 2 percentages on this next data point, but 62% of the top 50 brands on the Juice, so 31 of the top 50 brands on the Juice, are gating less than 3% of their content. So again, we're not sitting here trying to tell you should never gate content, but it should probably only be a very small part of your content suite if you are gating content. So this just goes to show that if you are going to gate this content, that other brands, the brands that are most successful, they're not relying on gated content to drive their pipeline. They're picking very specific pieces and they're gating a very small amount of that content. We saw the brands at the higher end of that spectrum were still only gating about 25 to 30% of their content. That was kind of the upper limit that we saw across all of the brands we evaluated. And finally, the punchline to the report. So our platform allows us to look at all resources on a level playing field. And we actually found that ungated content is outperforming gated content by 26%. Both are performing, but ungated is just slightly outperforming that gated content. For marketers, I think what this means is that we often think we're making arbitrary decisions on what we should gate. And we often think it is our most engaging content. Well, in a level playing field, it's actually less engaging than the other content that we're traditionally publishing. So I think if you are going to gate content, it's just really important that you understand your audience and you know exactly what you should be gating, and you're using data to guide that decision as opposed to just thinking that you're gating your most engaging content. As part of the report, we actually asked our community, like we always do in our trends reports. We reached out to 20 or 25 people, again, like we typically do for a trends report. And typically we get 5 or 6 responses, which we're always happy to include in the trends report. Again, for this trends report, we reached out to 20 or 25 people, and we got 20 to 25 responses. So we knew we were on to something as we started bringing that report together, and we had a very passionate community of people who cared greatly about gating or ungating content. 2 of the quotes here that I've pulled out from the community, they'll be joining us in just a few moments. And the other I just thought was really strong and worth sharing. I love Lindsay's perspective here that you have to build the brand equity, the trust in the brand, to kind of have the permission to ask for email. And you can only expect your audience to hand over that email if they do trust your brand. And that's often we skip that step as we're thinking about gating versus ungating content. Molly's perspective was even eye-opening to me. It was kind of a different perspective, a different lens to look at this than what I think traditionally we do. We often think they fill out the form and we've got what we want, and we stop thinking about the experience there. I love Molly's perspective because she says if you are going to gather that email, you need to make sure that you're actually adding value and not just passing it off to an SDR and hoping it converts from there. How are you adding value with the information that they're sharing? We'll talk to Molly a little bit more about that in our panel discussion. Lastly, Zach here from Copy AI, one of our partners. The piece I love here is just the playbook has changed, right? And so, a lot of the gated strategy was informed by HubSpot inbound almost 20 years ago. It was really effective in the early days because not everybody was doing it. Now, almost everybody is doing it. And everybody is onto the playbook. So we have to think about better ways to engage our audience. And this is a good segue for me to start to talk about our panel right before I invite them on stage. But one of the things we talked about as a team as we were writing this report is that we were looking at this in a very two-dimensional or a very binary way of gating or ungating content. Now there are so many other ways to engage your audience that go beyond just content. We have some of those brands here today. And so I'm excited to talk to them about beyond content, how are we engaging with our audience? So at this point, I'm going to introduce bring our other panelists on stage. We'll start the panel portion of the discussion and stop sharing slides. All righty, we've got the whole crew here. Excited to see all of them, excited for you all to meet them. Before we maybe jump into the more Q&A portion of the panel, why don't we start by you each introducing yourself, giving the audience a little bit of your background, your role, and your business, and then also your business's kind of current stance on or current ethos on gating or ungating content to keep us all from interrupting each other. Why don't we go alphabetically by last name? So Andy, Molly, Lindsay, and then we'll jump into the more open Q&A session. Andy.
Cool. Yeah. Great to be here. Hello, everyone. I'm Andy Binkley. I'm the CMO and co-founder at Tourial, Demo Automation, Interactive Demos. And yeah, I think our stance on gated versus ungated, we don't like skew hard one way or the other, but we're primarily ungating almost all our content because we sell and market to folks just like everyone on this webinar right now. And most of those folks do not want to go through that process. And we pretty much ungate everything, but.
Awesome. I'm happy to be here too. I'm Molly Clarke, and I am the VP of Digital at Spiff. I think at Spiff, we like to look at content and whether or not we gate it through the lens of, does it add anything to the prospect or buyer or potential buyer's experience for this gate to be here? So what are we going to do with the information they give us, and how are we going to use it to improve that experience? And if we can't, we don't gate it. We only do that when it is something that we can use later to add to the experience or make sure that they are getting more information or expanding on whatever it was that they engaged with.
Hey everyone, excited to be here. I am Lindsay McGuire, the Associate Director of Content and Campaigns at Goldcast. You're actually experiencing Goldcast right now. So we are a digital events platform specifically built for B2B marketers. So really excited for you to be experiencing my product today. I would say our gating philosophy is to try to minimize gating as much as possible, but being strategic when we do gate. So I think there has to be a certain level, kind of like you brought up in my quote, Jonathan, of trust and brand building, and also value your offering in order to have that gate up. So I'd say we usually skew on, freedom of the presses, I guess, at Goldcast as far as when it comes to gating, but also knowing that there are some, KPIs we have that are attached to having a gate and that opportunity. So being strategic when we do that.
Love that. Looks like we had a brief fifth panelist there, Molly, joining us. Big fan of that.
I would like to tell you that won't happen again, but I have no control over the situation. So I can't promise that.
I love it. Well, speaking of Goldcast and speaking of ungating or gating content, we're big fans. I'm going to open a poll here and let our audience go to the polls tab and answer whether or not your marketing team is gating content, ungating content, or some combination thereof while we continue the Q&A with our panelists here. So, Andy, why don't we start with you? I mentioned earlier, gated versus ungated content is really a very 2D way to look at the decision. What Tourial does is you guys provide interactive demo experiences. How does that experience maybe replace a traditional gated experience, or how does it complement what brands are doing from a content perspective?
Yeah, I mean, interactive demos are just one new type of content, alongside video and events and webinars and resources. For us, the interactive demos are just more of a higher intent signal. So like content throughout the entire life cycle, the entire journey is very much either, it spans a different part of the funnel at all times. Could be really top funnel and educational, could be a little bit more mid funnel, could be a little bit more bottom funnel, which is more product focused, right? So that's the great thing about interactive demos that I love so much, is that they're very high intent focused. And so you just need to kind of plan accordingly and kind of market and do your content strategy accordingly, where using interactive demos makes sense to make sure that it's focused on the more bottom funnel, mid funnel, and not, plaster it all over necessarily parts of your website, parts of your top funnel marketing where it might not resonate as well. You can do it in some capacity, like really short instances, but yeah, it's really more of, where in the funnel does it fit? And that's really kind of how you think about all the content that you're creating and producing, think about where in the funnel it fits and how you want to attack that market accordingly.
That's a great call out, and one I didn't kind of mention in the overview. I mentioned templates and toolkits were our most engaging gated content. Our least engaging content format for gated content was case studies. which makes sense, right? Because case studies are traditionally bottom of funnel. And if you're to that point with a business, you don't feel like you should be giving up or need to give up your information to access a case study, right? So unsurprising when you really think about it, but it was by a large margin, the smallest performer, or the least engaging piece of content format on the platform. So yes, I agree with your comment in the chat there, Lindsay. We're surprised to see it even being gated. So Lindsay, why don't we turn it over to you? Similarly, events, maybe not a traditional piece of content as we think about ebooks, white papers, guides, whatever it may be, but they are kind of a way to capture the same information. So sort of same thing. Do you guys view events as gated content, or how do you guys even like consult your customers on fitting events and that experience into what they're doing with the rest of their content library?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I've never really thought of live events being a gated piece of content, right? Because it's irrefutable that like you can always gate an event because it just makes sense. I need to send you your calendar invite. I need to send you the link to access it. It's just an automatic kind of like comfortable, understandable sequence of events. And it is interesting because technically it is gated, right? Like that is a gate. You have to fill out a form to then get the access and information. But to me, when I think about events in a gating strategy, I honestly think about on-demand access and how you approach that, because that is really like what strikes me as like the, gated version of an event, because we all expect to fill out a form to attend an event for the most part, or somehow RSVP or indicate we're interested. And so I think where the real interesting conversations come is the on-demand side of live events and events you're running and webinars and things like that, because you can choose to have full access to all your content and not gate anything. You can choose to gate things at certain points or certain access points. For instance, we might have the landing page for our entire series, like our series masterclass, where if you land there, then you have to fill out the form to access. But we might have those full episodes accessible in different blog posts or different distribution channels. So I think when it comes to the conversation around gating events, it's really more on the post live and the on-demand side and how you treat that, because you're not, I mean, I guess you could have an event that's ungated, but I don't know how that would even really work. So I think it really comes down to your distribution after the event runs live.
All right, Lindsay, coach me up. What's your best advice on should the post event be available on demand or gated, or do you kind of make it open to everybody?
I would say there's a mix, right? Like it depends on where it's living, what that access point is. So if you're landing on the registration page we used for that live event, like it's going to be a gated on-demand experience. And if you landed there, there should be enough context, enough helpful information, even some like snippets we can integrate to give you reason to be like, oh, I'll hand over my email to watch this. But if it's something like we run our Donuts and Demand show, which is a live monthly event for demand generation marketers, we want people to convert to that next live episode. So to do that, we give them a free-for-all access on that landing page to all past episodes so they can understand the worth very quickly and understand like, oh yeah, I do want to submit this form. I do want to sign up. So I know everyone hates the like, it depends answer, but it really isn't. It depends. And again, it also is the comfortability of your audience, the trust of your audience, and the strategies and how that's all playing together. And what's the purpose of gating or ungating that piece of content too.
It sounds very similar to what Molly was saying earlier. If you can add value, sure, gate it. But if you're not adding value, then you're not doing your brand the right kind of amount of trust. So I like that perspective a lot. I think it depends is fine. A lot of marketing is it depends. Molly, I'm going to kick it over to you. One other thing that Spiff does specifically, I'd encourage everybody to go check out Spiff's content. We are big fans at the Juice of Spiff's content. And I think part of that is you all have a ton of access to sales data. And you all are always sharing really helpful templates, which I think is incredibly valuable, as well as really helpful data that you can even like benchmark against or kind of research. But almost all of that, from what I can tell, is ungated. Is that something you all like wrestle with, or do you get pressure from leadership to keep some of that behind the scenes?
I can't say we've wrestled with it too much. And I will say we do have gated assets. One thing that we do is everything that is gated, for the most part, if it exists on our website and you can navigate to it just from our homepage, so we'll make it available. Let me flip that around. Everything that you can see on our website is ungated. We might offer it somewhere else as a gate, but we will never offer something that's gated through like an ad program or a digital program and then put it on our website, if that makes sense. So there are a few things that we gate and make sure in terms of content that just don't make sense for people to stumble upon and maybe engage with if they're not the right persona, if they're not ready yet, if it's heavily technical and they might not be there yet, it might actually add confusion. And so in those instances, we will use our channels to like get hyper targeted and make sure it's landing in front of the exact right people. But for the most part, if we don't encounter that situation, we make sure everything's available on our website and easy to navigate to. That's not to say you might find a LinkedIn ad or something that is gating that same piece. And the way that we think about it, and the reason we do it that way, is because traditionally we've always used forms and gates as a mechanism to further someone along the buyer's journey. So kind of force that next step. So maybe they download an ebook and then an SDR reaches out and says, hey, do you have any questions about that ebook you downloaded? I found, and we do this at Spiff, if you can add that next step in the piece that they're engaging with without having to gate it, you can kind of move people through in a much more organic way, in a way that builds trust, in a way that builds value, especially if you make it readily available and it's specific to the thing that they're currently engaging with. And it's a logical progression. People will move themselves through that funnel, and you tend to build a lot more goodwill with any kind of readers or people who are engaging that way. So it hasn't been a huge debate. Luckily, we're all about data here and not just sharing it, but using it to kind of inform our decisions. And every step of the way, we've been able to kind of back up all of that, all of those sentiments, and just prove the worth, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Similar to what Andy was saying earlier, right? Just it's all about the right content, the right stage in the funnel. And yeah, even better if you can kind of let people guide themselves through those stages on their own, which it sounds like you're doing. It's really powerful. I think a lot of times the gated conversation is actually out of the marketer's hands, or the decision. I think a lot of times marketers believe like, hey, everything should be ungated. We have access. We want people to see it. That's what's best for our brand. But I think a lot of times, I felt this previously in my career, you're getting pressure from maybe an executive or a leadership team. They've got a slide in their board deck where they have to show MQLs or leads, and they're getting pressured like, hey, we have to gate this to hit this number. I'll open this up to the group. Feel free, one of you to jump in, or a couple of you. Would love all of your perspective. But if there's a marketer that they're feeling that pressure from elsewhere in the business, that they need to gate their content to create that lead engine, what advice would you have for them to kind of navigate away from that maybe dated playbook?
I can speak to this a little bit because it's something that I've definitely struggled with. Especially owning digital channels and having to be the one that reports on those as well as the content piece of it. I think it comes down to leadership, in the sense of being able to communicate to your leadership team, both upwards and down the ladder, the value of tying things back to whether it's pipeline or revenue, and not just those lead numbers. And so if you can say, okay, well, we didn't have as many MQLs or leads because we didn't gate X, Y, and Z things like we did last quarter, but we did generate more pipeline, and this amount of pipeline actually has a touch point that is a piece of content that was previously gated. We can see that the engagement has gone up because we aren't gating it, and we can now see that the corresponding, whether it's pipeline or revenue. And so I found it helpful to kind of adjust and kind of base what we do around the highest level metric rather than getting stuck in the weeds with the leads and the MQL numbers. And that just kind of lifts everybody up and lifts everybody's perspective to align around the more important piece of it versus what that mechanism is for collecting the contact information. It's kind of how we think about it.
Yeah, just look at it all and tie it to revenue, right? Or pipeline, like I feel like it is kind of that simple. It just sometimes it takes additional work, right? And, if you're collecting a bunch of leads through lead gen, whether it's paid or unpaid on your website, landing pages, like if it's not turning into anything, if it's taken forever, which in a lot of cases, for a lot of folks, that's probably the case, then it's probably not worth doing it. I think the problem is like when you do more of that ungating and then all of a sudden sales and pipeline are down, then the immediate blame goes to, well, it's because we ungated everything, right? When that's probably most likely not the case at all. And so you just like resort to old behaviors. And it's, something you got to really commit to if you're going to do it.
And I think too, in this conversation, a lot of impact comes from your tech stack and what access to data and visibility you have. And a lot of that is going to be changing in the next 1 to 5 years. So we're all here for that roller coaster ride, whether we want to or not. But I think when it comes to changing perspectives, changing opinions and thoughts, it really depends, what your marketing team is measured against, and then how are you collecting that data to then prove those points you're reporting back to your CEO or your board or your marketing leadership. So there's a lot of little caveats and things that play into that. But again, it's kind of like, I've seen this very much on social media. People used to be so obsessed with engagement and, getting the likes or the comments. And now the conversation is actually shifting to, but you have to think about the lurkers and the people who are actually like reading your content. They might not ever engage with you ever, but you are actually making an impact through that. So I think it's that same kind of lens of thinking. If you are able to back up off the gate everything cliff and thinking about, well, you might not be able to capture that email address right in that moment, but think about the, again, trust, the brand affinity, the access you're building with these people. And in the long term, that's going to have a lot greater impact probably.
Yeah, I think that's, go ahead, Andy.
I was just going to say, like, you also, this is tangentially related, but you have to be, as a marketer, willing to go to bat and fight for it internally, which I think a lot of people just don't have the mental desire to do that. And they're like, fine, screw it. We'll just do a lead gen model and MQLs all day. Because it's a lot of effort to convince people to switch to this model. And, sometimes it's just not worth it. And it's tough. Like, you really have to commit, and it takes a while to get people bought into this new operation, especially if your operation is very tied to a lead gen MQL type of model. So, I mean, that's, especially if you're out there interviewing, like, it's something to really factor in when you're thinking about going to a new company and how to evaluate the executive staff and ask them, like, how they measure these types of things. And, you see it on LinkedIn all the time, work for a CEO that gets marketing, and it's true. Right. So, yeah,
I think knowing what you're getting into is a huge part of that. And Lindsay, I think your point on dark social is so good. I think, if even gated resources, there's far better signals of high quality content than somebody sharing that piece of content in a Slack group, right? Or in a community where there's that inherent trust built in with like-minded individuals in that community. And I think if you're gating your content, somebody's downloading that content, like, you still want them sharing it with the community, right? So it's all about that access. And I think, that's what's really successful content in this world, where we're all in these communities or these groups where people are sharing content that they're learning from and resharing it. Again, I think that access is really important. I mentioned it in my kind of prelude to this, but I have really appreciated that through this conversation, through the report, through the feedback we got from the community, that nobody here is like you should never gate content, right? Even Molly, you were talking earlier about how you guys do choose to do it, but I'd be curious, do you all have any examples of times you have gated content and it's been successful, and what you think the kind of secret ingredients to that being successful were, and anything the audience can learn from that?
I mean, I'll go first. I'll be pretty quick, and this, I promise, is not a product plug, but like we have customers that gate their demos all the time, and it's very successful. Like, just because it's novel, right? So like taking it up and making it a little bit more applicable, like it's very novel. It's something that people really, really want access to. Is without having to sign up for your application or talk to sales, they can just experience the application. So people gate their demos a lot because there's some real value behind there, especially if you're a medium to high intent buyer. So for us, that's where it's really shined. And I'm sure for the rest of you, it's probably like proprietary data and stuff like that. But
yeah, you led me right into mine. I'm always going to be a proponent of gating your proprietary data.
Yeah.
One campaign I've run in the past is we did a state of digital maturity report. That was a report that identified what set apart the most efficient organizations from the least efficient organizations. And I think the key to the success of that content, because it was a completely gated report, is that we then took that standalone research report, integrated it into 6 months, if not a year, of content. And all the other content we produced from that was ungated. We highlighted our podcast. We put a quiz together for it. We put together an array of blog posts, repositioned it through different channels and distribution tactics. And all that was ungated. But each of those pieces then drew back to that original piece that was gated. And we were able to get the buy-in, build that trust, build that interest and intrigue. And they felt comfortable enough that, like, I know what this is about. I know the value it will give me. And I know and understand what I'm going to learn from it. So now I feel like I am confident and comfortable filling out this form and giving my email over and all the things that you have to weigh when you come to like a gated page. So I would say if you are gating a large piece of content like that, just figure out ways to repurpose it in ways that are not gated, to then kind of full cycle it and get more of the people to then hand over their information to get past that gate. So that was a really successful thing I've done in the past.
I feel like
Lindsay,
you can gate anything that is state of anything is like grounds for, I can gate this because it's probably going to be something really great behind this, right? But then that's also the risk, right? The risk of doing that is if it doesn't kick ass, then you like lose all that brand equity and that trust. So like it's a balance there.
We had a really funny meeting as we were working on this report internally, where it's like, wait a second, should we gate this? And it became this very big like meta conversation we were having, and it's ungated. So that tells you a little bit of our thoughts, but it is a state of report, but it's ungated. Lindsay, real quick, and then Molly, I'm interested in your thoughts here as well. But Lindsay, you guys do compensation reports at Goldcast, I know. I assume, do you all gate those?
So it's interesting, the stance we've had in the past, and I assume we'll probably continue on the future. We haven't done our releases for 23 yet, but what we've done in the past is we've done kind of a condensed, free, open, ungated version on our website that anyone can access. And then the gate that leads to that is, hey, do you want to download an extended full version of this? Give us your email, and then it's a nicely packaged PDF that goes a little bit more in depth, has a little bit more value and content and pieces to it. But we've done an interesting balance between giving people access to the data, getting them intrigued, knowing about this compensation report. So for contents, we've done an event and field marketer compensation report for 2 years. And then we are actually launching a demand generation compensation report. That'll be a sister report going into March of this year. So we've done kind of a balance between having a version that's ungated and then having a higher value asset that is gated. And I think with the PDF, because I think some people be like, a PDF, oh my gosh, but I think then people can easily store it. They can easily share it. They can easily swipe file it, right? Like we've all gone through the nightmare of trying to take like a screenshot of a website page. If it's like, oh, this looks terrible. And, how do I share this? But, when we have that PDF file accessible, again, it's behind a gate, but having it accessible makes it so much easier for people then to go out and share and refer back to and things like that.
Yeah, so there are two instances where I have seen gates work really well. The first is like a partial gating, which is similar to what Lindsay's just talking about, where you kind of tee up the material and get people interested by feeding them some of the value up front. So whether that's on the landing page or you can only read part of the article, or even in a social post, whatever channel you're using to promote it, if you leak a little bit of that content and let the people know, like, hey, this is of value. Here's what you're going to find in it. And here's a few pieces that you can take away without giving us anything. I think you kind of earn that goodwill and that trust. And again, then it's easy to save, right? You could email it to them. They can go back and reference it if it's something super long that they don't have time to read now. The other instance, and this might be a controversial take a little bit, but is in the middle of the funnel when somebody has already potentially established that they have an issue or a problem that they're trying to solve. They haven't necessarily engaged with your brand and filled out a form at any point yet. And the thing that they're most interested in is a pretty targeted, high intent piece. So if it's a buyer's guide or something along those lines, adding a little bit of friction and a little bit of a barrier to entry makes the next pieces of that flow, one, possible, and two, more helpful. And what I mean by that is if you have an ungated buyer's guide and then you're surfacing anyone who clicks on it to sales, right? And you're expecting sales or the business development team to go follow up with them, you're opening the floodgates. You have no idea if that person is a casually interested, if they're just interested in it looked pretty, or they're a marketer and they want to potentially copy something in it, or you have no idea what their intent is. And so those high intent pieces, sometimes if they're in the middle of the funnel and you are positive that you've already built that trust to get that person there, it can serve as a little bit of a barrier and more of a hand raise, so that when that salesperson does reach out, they're more welcome to that conversation because they did want that information. They were intending to buy something or looking to buy something. So I know that we should make things as frictionless as possible, but a little bit of friction sometimes filters out and serves as like an extra qualifying step. And I'd use that one cautiously and only when you feel like it's exactly the right thing to do. But I do like that. I do think it makes sense sometimes.
Yeah, I got a question. I got a question for you, Molly. I agree. I think a little friction is fine. It also helps weed out the disqualified people who don't make sense to chat with sales. So I think a little friction is okay. I'm curious. Something that really kind of frustrates me is when I go to a website, I'll fill out a form, and I'm in their system, I'm cookied, whatever. I come back, whether it's a few days, a few weeks, whatever, and I still have to keep filling out form after form after form to access content, as opposed to like, well, I'm in your system, I'm on your website, you have my cookie, like, I know like HubSpot kind of does this pretty well with their like progressive profiling, and like you can just access something. Do you feel like that applies to like the buyer's guide type of stuff too, or like is the friction still important to have in that process?
I think it's exclusive to a first form fill. Okay. And I also think it's important to consider what that journey looks like. So walking through every step of that, not just up until the form fill. And so when we look at, is this better for the buyer experience, or is this going to be annoying? That goes to the point of, okay, they want to read it again. Are we sending it to their inbox so that they can search for it quickly? What format are we sending it to them in? And let's make sure they never get to this landing page again, as long as they can access the end thing the end product better, if that makes sense. So we don't have anything gated on our website in our resource center, simply because that piece of it is related. I mean, there are a few reasons why, but we'll use them in the same pieces in advertising campaigns and send it directly to that person. And they're never going to then come back to our website, see this thing that they once saw and found interesting, but maybe didn't have time to read, and then have to fill out another form because it's already ungated on our website. And that's kind of how somebody might not go to their email address to look for this thing they downloaded, right? They might go to spiff.com and, oh, hey, it's probably in their resource center. And if we did have that form there, that's an instance where that's not helpful. That's kind of annoying. Yeah, they could search their email, but now we're adding a third extra unnecessary step. So it's definitely something we think through. And the reason our website is pretty much, for the most part, all ungated content.
That's so good. Great question, Andy. Molly, on your point earlier, we were actually talking to one of our customers earlier, and he was a marketer earlier today, but he was saying he actually prefers account level insight, account level intent signals, because he feels if you get contact level intent signals and you pass that to your sales team, they just don't think. He's like, they just send an email or dial, right? And he's like, account level, the threshold for a salesperson to act on it, they have to see that account 4 or 5 times, and it forces them to actually think a little bit and slow down and be like a little bit more educated in that outreach versus just getting an email, which I thought was awesome perspective from a marketer. I don't know if his sales team would say the same thing, but it was a pretty interesting kind of perspective shift on what I had heard previously. Interesting. All right, so it's January. We've got a group of great marketers here. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask what you guys expect to see, kind of your projections for the year. I mentioned in the slides that a lot of the gated content strategy and tactic was based off of inbound marketing that was created 15, 20 years ago by HubSpot. Kind of B2B content is changing. You're seeing all sorts of predictions and where B2B marketing is going. Kind of what are you all expecting to see in 2024 unfold from a content perspective and maybe even a broader B2B marketing perspective?
I have kind of like a little bit of a radical one.
Let's do it. Hot take time.
Some people might disagree, but I think we are finally at the precipice where people might not be harping so much on do more with less. I think we might actually be finally thinking about doing less, but doing what you're doing less, more high quality. And I think if you do that the right way, then you can make this idea that's been percolating for a long time of the content repurposing that much better. Because if you're putting a lot of time and effort into a very finite set of campaigns and ideas and strategies and tactics, and you're executing them exceptionally well, then you have such a strong starting point to then do all of the things that we've been talking about of repurposing and redistribution and repackaging and, oh, it's gated here, but it's ungated here. And I think we're finally maybe having these conversations of like, maybe it's not so much economies of scale at a net new kind of mindset. I think a lot of times we've been thinking about, well, how do I create, 10 pieces and then, and all the work that goes into that. But how do you make one really good thing that you can then use as the basis to make those 10 other things? Because we can't deny there is an economies of scale, right? When it comes to distribution and SEO and optimization and all the things that play into that. But I'm hopeful maybe we're going to see a rise in quality. And granted, AI's there in the creepy corner, and there's a lot of orgs using AI really inappropriately and really terribly. So I think that is kind of the flip side of that. I think we'll see maybe a dark side of that too, of people who are like, oh no, I can still play like, the massive push it out game. But I think we've already seen some studies come out from marketers and from thought leaders talking about how that's actually dangerous and can damage your brand. So I'm kind of hopeful that we're going to see some really excellent quality this year, and maybe not so much pushing all the things, but really focusing and then using that to address our audiences in different ways and how they want to get that content.
So interesting take on that. I wouldn't be surprised as well, Lindsay, if Google comes up with a way using their AI to know what content is AI driven versus what is authentic. And just like anything in SEO, they throw it into their algorithm and they ding you in the search results if it's been built by AI or if there's a lot of AI influence in it, because that could be deemed as low quality. It gets the least engagement. Nobody likes it, versus the more authentic brand built content. And they'll probably reward that content with better rankings in the search results.
Andy, I love the way you kind of whispered and hand waved Google.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I have something pretty similar. And it's just, I think people are sick of mass-produced, thin, AI-generated content. And so I think the brands that really double down on human stories and tying in real-life examples and talking to real people and adding in faces and names and videos and real-life experiences, I think the brands that continue to do that will be successful. And I think the brands that do rely a little too heavily on AI are going to suffer, whether it's at the hands of Google or because people are just sick of it. I'm hopeful that that is the direction we're heading in.
That's so good. I love that. Cool. Question here from the audience. Good one, I think. The person asked, they're moving to ungating they're experimenting with ungating all of their content. Traditionally, they've gated ebooks and reports. As they're making that move to ungating content, do you all have a best practice or recommendation on, is it better for a report or ebook that is ungated to live as a PDF or more as like an interactive blog or long form blog post? How do you all handle that actual asset being delivered when either ungated or even when it is a gated asset? I'd be curious.
Do both. Make the PDF and then turn it into a really long blog post and let people download it at the end of the blog post or somewhere in line within the blog post. And because like the actual blog post HTML content is going to be way better for searchability, for SEO. PDFs, they rank okay on desktop, but they suck on mobile because PDFs aren't mobile optimized, even though Google can crawl PDFs. I would do both. Honestly, like if you're doing the PDF, then you can definitely do the blog article, right? You just copy pasta right into your blog post. So that's what I would do. I would do both.
I would say also ask your audience what they want. Like what does your audience want and how do they, want to get that content? And you might find that you have a variety of ways you need to do it. Because for instance, like there are some things that I like to ingest through video. That's kind of a weird word, isn't it? Ingest. There's some things I like to view through a video, but there's other things that I would much rather read and have an article on. So I would say just ask your audience, do some polling, do some conversations, go into your call recorder and see if you can pull any data from there of what prospects and customers are asking for. And of course, ask your internal teams too, but they're going to be swayed sometimes on this conversation. So be careful when you ask the internal teams.
Yeah, I'm also always team both. We generally don't we don't duplicate what's in the PDF into the blog post. We do a very similar version, and it's like a light version, and then push to the ebook or whatever the long form piece is.
There you go, Caleb. You ask a question and you got more work from us by telling you to do both, but I think worthwhile in this case. So appreciate that advice from everybody here. Well, cool. We have hit AI. We've hit it depends. We've said do both. We had a good conversation around gated versus ungated. We talked about other ways to engage your audience outside of just kind of the binary gated versus ungated. So I'm going to call it a wrap there. If you are interested in learning more about any of the brands today, here's where you can do that. If you're interested in content distribution, we're obviously always happy to chat with you. We're big Goldcast, Tourial, and Spiff fans. So if you're interested in learning more about any of those things, you can visit their websites there, or obviously reach out to the individuals here. Connect with us on LinkedIn, download the report, reach out with any questions post-event. We appreciate everyone taking the time today. We'll give you just a few minutes back here at the end. Thanks for joining, and we'll hope to talk to you soon. Thanks.
Thanks, y'all.